The sun was dipping low, casting gold across the dying fields. Dust rose in quiet ghosts behind the hooves of a lone horse, the air trembling with heat and sorrow. Ellie Mae stood at the window, thin fingers pressed against the cracked glass, watching the birdless sky and the road that led away from everything she had once called safe. The hem of her dress brushed the floor like a sigh. She hadn't spoken all morning. Inside the farmhouse her father paced. He didn't speak either, not because he held regret, but because he didn't believe in apologies. Emotions were things for women and weak men. He'd told her so when she cried after her mother's funeral, when she bled the first time, when she tried to keep the neighbor's mule from being whipped. Softness was a flaw in a world where land was scarce, water scarcer, and reputation meant survival. Ellie had learned silence young. The boots came first, cutting through the dust. Then the voice. She ready? Rough and iron thick. Judah Kane. Ellie's stomach curled in on itself. She stepped back from the window just as the door opened. Her father turned, nodded once, then looked at her without seeing her. Go on, girl, he said. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder, as if her heart hadn't already calcified inside her chest. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Her father owed Kane money, more than he could ever repay. The banks wouldn't lend to a man with a failed crop and a whiskey habit, and Kane, well, Kane liked his payments in flesh and power. He was an outlaw, yes, but a respected one in his own way. Men feared him, and that was a kind of currency out here. He owned a spread near the border, horses, men, weapons. He took what he wanted, and today he wanted her. She was 19. He was nearly 50. Kane's eyes raked over her like he was assessing the quality of a saddle. She's skinny, he muttered, but she'll fill out. No one laughed. He offered her father a folded packet of papers and a look of contempt. I'll keep her alive. That's more than she'd get out here. Then to Ellie, get your things. We ride in 10. Ellie didn't move. Not at first. Not until her father shifted his weight and muttered her name like it was a warning. She turned. Upstairs her room was already bare. Her things had been packed, poorly, impatiently, into a leather sack. She wasn't even allowed the decency of preparing her own escape. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached beneath her bed and pulled out the carved sparrow her younger brother Thomas had made her. The wings were chipped, the beak dulled with age, but it had been hers. Hers alone. Thomas had once told her, if you ever leave, take this. It'll remind you you're still free, even when you're not. She tucked it into her satchel, between her mother's locket and a scrap of paper where she'd written, years ago, the word someday. When she came back down, the world outside was red with dusk. Kane was already mounted. His horse was as black as the sins written in his shadow. He didn't offer a hand, just jerked his chin toward the smaller mare tied behind him. As she climbed up, her brother came running. He wasn't supposed to be outside. He'd snuck past the drunk hand sleeping in the barn. Ellie, he shouted, breathless. Wait. Kane grunted and moved to grab the reins, but Ellie held up a hand. Just 1 second. Thomas reached her, eyes wide, fists balled. Don't go. She tried to smile but failed. I have to. No, you don't. Run. I'll help. Her voice cracked. I can't, Tommy. Not yet. He pulled something from his pocket. A second sparrow. Tiny. Rushed. I made this just now, in case you lost the first. She took it with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered. Kane spat to the side. Enough. Mount up. She obeyed. They rode into the night. Kane spoke only once before they reached his ranch. You don't talk unless I ask. You don't leave the house unless I say. You're mine now. Understand? Ellie didn't answer. By the time they reached the outlaw's land, the moon was high and cruel. Kane's cabin sat atop a ridge overlooking dark woods and a sluggish river. The house was big but cold, built by men for war, not warmth. Inside, everything smelled like gunpowder and sweat. There were no women, just Kane, two rough-looking ranch hands, and silence. He led her to a room in the back. Bare walls, thin, mattress, bolted window. "This is yours," he said. "Don't make me regret my generosity." When the door shut behind him, Ellie exhaled for the first time in hours. She didn't unpack. She simply lay down, fully dressed, eyes open to the cracks in the ceiling. Days passed like shadows. Kane didn't touch her, not yet. But his ownership was everywhere. He watched her as if waiting for her to misstep. The ranch hands avoided her eyes. Meals were eaten in silence. She was allowed outside only in the mornings and only within the fence line. Still, the river called to her. One morning, after a week, Kane nodded toward the barn and said, "Take water to the horses." She obeyed, hands raw from cleaning, legs aching from the ride. On her way back, she saw movement in the trees. A man. Still. Watching. Not one of Kane's. Tall, quiet, dressed in leather and bone. He stood by the tree line like a statue carved from earth itself. His skin was deep bronze, his face unreadable save for the eyes, steady, dark, endless. He didn't move, just watched. Ellie paused. Something stirred in her, curiosity, not fear. She lifted her head just slightly. The man gave a slow nod, then turned and disappeared into the woods. That night, Kane noticed. "You see someone?" Ellie didn't flinch. "No." He studied her, eyes like rusted nails. "You lie poorly." She said nothing. Another day passed, then two. She began walking near the fence when allowed, hoping, though she'd never admit it, to see him again. She did. Same place, same silence. Always from a distance. He never approached, never smiled, just stood, watching. Until one day, he wasn't alone. Another man, white, older, saw her staring into the woods and said, "You don't want to be caught looking at him. That's a Shawnee. They don't forget slights, and they sure as hell don't mix kindly." Ellie turned. "What's his name?" The man snorted. "Ain't my business to know, but I heard he lives just past the bend with his sister. Keeps to himself. Which is good, for him and for us." She held the image of him in her mind that night. The way he stood, not like Kane, who puffed out his chest and growled his power. No. This one carried silence like a shield, like he needed no noise to prove anything. That night, Kane didn't return until late, drunk. She heard boots in the hall, then the door handle twitch. But it didn't open, just a pause, breathing. Then he left. The next morning, Ellie found the smaller sparrow had fallen from her shelf and broken in two. She stared at the pieces, then quietly, carefully, tucked them into the pocket of her apron. Later, she walked to the edge of the property. No one stopped her this time. He was there, closer now. She stood. He stood. Neither moved, but something passed between them. Not words, not touch, just something ancient and unseen. Recognition, not of faces, but of spirit, as if their souls had once met on some other plane. A crow cawed. The wind shifted. She turned, heart pounding. Back at the bow cabin, Kane stood in the doorway, watching, and this time he was smiling. She moved through the outlaw's house like smoke through timber, quiet, weightless, always there but never touched. They called her Cain's woman now, though no ring marked her finger and no kindness lived in the man's voice when he summoned her. The ranch hands, Red and Murphy, learned quick not to speak to her, not out of cruelty, but caution. They feared Cain more than they pitied her. In the early weeks, Ellie Mae became a routine more than a person. She lit the stove before dawn. She scrubbed Cain's boots when they were left caked in red clay. She cleaned rifles she didn't know the names of and cooked meals no one thanked her for. Her body moved, but her eyes didn't follow. She was present in the shape of a woman, but not in the soul of one. That part had curled in on itself and gone quiet. Cain didn't speak often. When he did, his words carried the weight of ownership, not conversation. Some nights, he returned drunk and silent. Other nights, he returned mean. Those were the nights she bolted her door. She knew he could break it down if he wanted to. But he never did. That, she supposed, was the only mercy he offered her. Time blurred. Days melted into a constant hush, where nothing changed except the angle of the sun and the scent of the wind. But sometimes when Cain rode out and the men were deep in their chores, Ellie would walk to the back of the barn and look past the fence into the woods. She never crossed it, not even when she was certain she was alone. But she always looked, and more often than not, he was there. The Shawnee. He'd become as much a part of her day as the morning fire. He never came close, never broke the barrier that separated their lives. But he was there, still as stone, and just as constant. She wondered if he knew what he was to her, a living question, a door she hadn't dared open. One afternoon, a storm rolled in sudden and hard. The skies turned black and thunder cracked like a warning. Cain was gone. Red and Murphy had ridden to town for supplies. Ellie watched the clouds gather like soldiers. She went outside to pull the laundry down before the rain claimed it. Wind tangled her hair, pulled her dress tight against her bones. That's when she saw him. Closer than ever, just on the other side of the fence. The storm held its breath. Their eyes met. She didn't run, and he didn't move. Ellie took one step forward. He raised a hand, not to wave, but in pause. And slowly he shook his head. Just once. Not yet. Then the skies split and rain came down like grief. She fled back inside, soaked, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That night Cain returned angry. Someone had spoken back to him in town. He didn't like being challenged. Ellie stayed in her room, pretending sleep, breath shallow. He didn't knock. Just leaned against the door for a long, long time. "You think you're better than me?" he finally muttered. "You think that silence makes you clean, but it don't. You're mine. You chose this when your father owed me. Don't forget it." She didn't answer. Eventually, he left. She waited another hour before she dared breathe deep again. Days passed. The rain softened the earth, made the world smell new. But inside the house, everything rotted. The quiet was turning sharp. One evening, Red came in with a gash across his cheek, said there'd been a knife pulled in town. Cain laughed, poured whiskey on it like it was a joke. But Ellie saw something else in Red's eyes that night. Weariness, a crack, maybe even doubt. Cain noticed. "You going soft?" he asked Red, voice low. "No, sir," Red replied, but he wouldn't meet Ellie's eyes. That night, when the house was asleep and the fire had died, Ellie snuck outside. Barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, she crept past the barn, past the fence, into the tall grass. He was there, closer now, close enough to touch. But still, he didn't move. "Why do you watch me?" she asked, voice barely louder than the wind. Looked at her, quiet as always. Then he said, Because you don't belong in chains. His voice was deep, earthy, a voice that had known pain but didn't let it poison him. Ellie stepped closer. Her feet bled from thorns, but she didn't care. Then help me break them. He said nothing. Then, you're not ready. A beat. Cain would kill you, he added, and I would have to kill him. Her heart twisted. And then, I'd carry that blood the rest of my life, even if it saved you. Silence fell between them. I don't even know your name, she whispered. He nodded once. Takwacha. She repeated it, tasting it like a prayer. Ellie. He smiled. Small, sad, I know. She reached into her pocket and pulled the broken sparrow, held it out. Takwacha took it gently, studied the halves. I want to be whole again, she said. And then she turned and walked back through the dark, heart beating loud enough to wake. The wolves. The next morning, Cain said he was riding to meet someone near the border. Don't touch nothing, he growled. And don't go outside the fence, I'll know. But Ellie had stopped caring what he knew. By noon, she returned to the spot near the trees. Takwacha was waiting. He handed her the sparrow, repaired. The crack was still visible, but it could fly again. She didn't speak, just held it to her chest and closed her eyes. He said, tomorrow at dusk, ride east. Follow the creek. You'll find my sister's place. It's safe there. Ellie shook her head. He'll follow me. No, I'll make sure he doesn't. How? Takwacha looked away. You don't want to know. But Ellie knew. She saw it in his jaw. In the weight behind his calm blood, he would spill it for her. No, she whispered. Not unless it's the only way. He nodded once. Then be ready. She returned home lighter than she'd felt in months. That night, she packed quietly. Only what mattered, her mother's locket, the carved sparrow, one change of clothes. Nothing more. No part of Cain would come with her. She didn't sleep. At dawn, Cain returned early. Drunk again. But there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Suspicion. Rage unformed. He tossed a rabbit onto the table. We need meat, he slurred. Clean it. She did, but her hands shook. He noticed. What's wrong? Girl, he asked. You see something out there? She lied. No, he stepped closer. You sure? You getting ideas? She didn't flinch. Only the kind that keep me breathing. He stared at her for a long, boiling second, then laughed. You're smarter than you look. But his eyes were still searching hers when he turned away. That night, she didn't bolt her door. She didn't have to, because by morning she would be gone. The night was thick with stillness, the kind that makes every creak in the wood sound like confession. Ellie sat on the edge of her bed, boots laced, heart stilled not by fear but by something fiercer. Decision. The fire inside her, long buried, beneath obedience and grief, now smoldered steady and hot. It did not flare wildly. It did not need to. It knew its path. Outside, the moon carved pale shadows across the dirt yard. The wind stirred the trees like a hush before scripture. Ellie slipped through the door without a sound, cradling the sparrow in her palm. The barn was a dark shape against the horizon, and her mare Willa stirred softly when she entered. She whispered as she saddled her, not in fear of waking Cain. He was in town again, or so he claimed, but out of reverence. This night, these quiet movements, this breath between captivity and flight, it all felt sacred. As the mare trotted toward the fence line, Ellie looked once over her shoulder. The house stood silent, empty of warmth. She did not say goodbye. That place had taken too much to deserve a farewell. She rode east, just as Takwacha had told her. The moonlight guided her path, and the sound of the creek soon joined her like an old friend. Her mind drifted as hooves splashed through shallow water. She remembered her mother's hands brushing her hair, her father's face before it turned cold with debt and fear. She remembered being loved, and then the rustle. It came swift, not wind, not animal, but the unmistakable rhythm of pursuit. She urged Willa forward, heart leaping. Behind her, hoofbeats echoed hers like a dark hymn. They were not Kane's. Not alone, at least. More than one. The shadows weren't empty. She veered from the creek, cutting through brush that slapped at her face, thorns snagging her sleeves. The forest closed in, but she didn't slow. She didn't stop until a sudden voice cut through the trees like a blade. Ellie Mae. Kane's voice. She froze. Somewhere, maybe 30 yards behind her, he was closing in. I should have known. He roared. Little ghost, walking soft like a thief. Where you think you're going? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Then, from the shadows ahead, came the sound of another horse, and another. And then, silence. She waited, breath locked in her chest. Kane burst into the clearing, his shirt half-buttoned, gun already drawn. Behind him, Red and Murphy flanked his sides, though their eyes looked uncertain in the moonlight. Kane leveled the pistol at her. You think some half-breed savage is gonna save you? He spat. You think that's love, girl? Ellie's voice was calm, like steel cooled by wind. I think love doesn't come with chains. Red flinched. Murphy looked down. Then, like a shadow stitched from the forest itself, Tuckwacha stepped into the clearing. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Kane saw him and laughed, a bitter, cracked sound. I knew it, he growled. I knew it. You've been feeding her lies, whispering like a snake. Tuckwacha moved forward, slow and measured. Kane raised the pistol. One more step and I'll paint this creek red. Ellie stepped in front of the horse. No. Her voice cut through the air, sharper than Kane's pistol. Kane blinked. You think I won't shoot through you? She didn't move. I think you already have. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Red muttered, We don't have to do this. Kane turned. You shut up. You work for me. But Murphy had already dismounted. I came here for cattle, he said softly. Not murder. Kane whirled back toward Ellie, rage boiling. I own you, he screamed. Your father gave you to me, his blood for mine. You think running off with a savage makes you clean? Tuckwacha took another step. Kane fired. The crack shattered the trees, but the bullet missed. Tuckwacha moved like fire, quiet but consuming. In 2 strides, he was upon Kane, knocking the gun from his grip, sending it spinning into the brush. The men behind didn't move. They watched, frozen by the fury they'd followed too long. Kane swung wildly, fists like clubs, but Tuckwacha ducked low, caught him at the ribs, and drove him backward into the mud. Kane spat, clawed, cursed. You don't get to take her, he growled. Tuckwacha's voice was low and full of thunder. She was never yours to take. Kane reached for a knife. Ellie shouted, but Tuckwacha was faster. With one precise strike, he disarmed him. Not with blood, but control. He pressed Kane's face into the mud, just enough to remind him of the earth he'd come from. Enough, Ellie said, stepping forward. Tuckwacha looked up at her. His eyes asked a question she couldn't yet answer. Kane lay in the dirt, broken, pride steaming off him like sweat. Red approached quietly and helped Murphy pull him to his feet. He ain't gonna chase you no more, Murphy muttered. Tuckwacha nodded, but his eyes never left Ellie. You don't have to come with me, he said gently, voice soft as mist. You're free now. You can go wherever you want. Ellie looked at him. For the first time in what felt like years, she let herself be. Still, not out of fear, not out of duty, but to feel, really feel, what lived inside her, and it was quiet there, but not empty. It was ready. She took Tukwatcha's hand, not in desperation, not in thanks, in choice. Red looked away, not out of shame, but respect. They mounted and rode east as the first light bled into the sky. Ellie did not look back, but the wind carried Cain's curses after her like brittle leaves, bitter, hollow, already forgotten. Ahead lay the creek, the hills, the cabin Tukwatcha had promised, a place with no chains, and maybe, just maybe, something like beginning. Behind her, the fire no longer smoldered in silence. It burned now, quiet, steady, and hers. The land beyond the creek was untouched by Cain's voice. It breathed like something ancient and unbothered, pine trees leaning close as if to whisper secrets, moss softening the ground like memory. Ellie rode in silence beside Tukwatcha. Her fingers curled around the reins, the sparrow nestled deep in her pocket, where its warmth pressed close to her heart. He did not ask questions. He did not press her for words. In his company, silence was not empty. It was sacred. It allowed the pieces of her to settle, to arrange themselves without demand. For the first time in years, she was not being shaped by someone else's will. The cabin sat low in a valley where the river curved like a ribbon of silver. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, and light spilled from the windows in golden pools. A woman stood at the door, her black braid long and streaked with gray. Her eyes, sharp as crow feathers, softened when she saw Ellie. "This is my sister Misi," Tukwatcha said simply. "She knows." Misi took Ellie's hand. "Come in," she said. "You're safe now." Inside, the air smelled of cedar and bread. There were no locked doors, no shadows waiting behind curtains, just warmth, clean wood, soft blankets. Ellie slept for 2 days. When she woke, Misi had left a bowl of wild berries and a note. "You sleep like a child who finally found her mother's arms." That morning, Ellie walked barefoot to the river. The cold bit at her toes, but she didn't flinch. She let the water wash her ankles clean. It wasn't just about dirt. It was about claiming her body again, inch by inch, as her own. Tukwatcha found her there, carving the sparrow from memory into a small piece of driftwood. His eyes watched her hands, not her face. "You carve like someone learning to breathe," he said. She looked up. "I forgot what it was like to be still." They sat on the riverbank, watching the wind ripple the surface. "There is something I must do," he said after a long moment. She knew. "Cain." He nodded. "He will not let this rest. Even if he cannot find you, he will burn something to feel he still owns fire." Ellie's jaw tensed. "I don't want more blood." "Neither do I," he said quietly. "But peace sometimes wears armor." She understood, not in her mind, but in the way her soul clenched around the thought of Cain's hands, Cain's voice, the tether that might still exist even now, waiting to drag her back. "I'll go with you." Tukwatcha turned to her. "No, I'm not hiding," she said. "Not anymore." They left at dawn, riding under a sky painted in slow blue. Misi pressed dried herbs into Ellie's palm, for strength, for clarity. "Whatever happens," she said, "remember this. You are not prey, you are not possession, you are blood and breath and will." They rode into town like ghosts unafraid of the living, and the town, it felt them. Doors quieted, eyes followed. No one dared speak Ellie's name out loud. It had become a kind of legend, the outlaw's bride who vanished, the Shawnee who walked beside her. Cain was in the saloon. He turned when the doors swung, that sneer rising like a reflex. But then he saw her, not as the quiet girl he'd once called his, But as something changed, something rooted, he rose, slowly, gun resting at his hip. "Thought you'd run off for good," he drawled, voice soaked in venom. "Changed your mind?" Taquacha stepped forward. "We didn't come to beg," he said. "We came to end this." Kane spat. "End what? She's mine by bond. Her daddy signed her away. You think some redskin fable changes that?" "No law owns her," Ellie said. Her voice was steady. "And neither do you." Kane's laugh was dry as dust. "That's what you think, but you ain't got land. You ain't got name. And love?" He flicked his eyes to Taquacha. "Love's just a story you tell yourself before the world kicks you in the teeth." Ellie stepped between them. "Then let this be the end of your story." Kane's hand dropped toward his holster, but he was slow, too slow, because for once, he wasn't the biggest force in the room. The sheriff stepped through the doorway behind them, old, tired, and done with turning his eyes. "That's enough," he said. "Kane, we've let you poison this town long enough. You lay a hand on that girl again and you'll answer for it, not just by law, but by every man who ever watched and said nothing." Kane's eyes burned with disbelief. "You all gone soft?" "No," the sheriff said. "We just woke up." Kane looked around for support, for loyalty, for fear. He found none. Red stepped out from the back corner, quiet, eyes low. "She was never yours," he said. "We all knew it. We just didn't have the spine to say it." Kane snarled and lunged, not for a gun, but for Ellie. One last desperate grab to claim what he'd lost. But Taquacha was there first. He moved like a shadow in water. Fast, unbroken. He didn't strike to kill. He struck to end. Kane collapsed to the floor, coughing, winded, not bleeding, but something in him finally cracked. The kind of break you don't come back from. No one reached for him. No one helped him stand. Ellie walked past him as if he were nothing more than dust on her boots. They rode back before the sun reached its highest point, the road behind them blooming with silence. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly the world unfolded itself again. One meal shared with Misi, one laugh that didn't feel borrowed. One morning when Ellie woke without dreaming of locked doors, she carved more sparrows, gave one to Misi, hung one above her bed, placed one on a stone by the river where her past had washed away. Taquacha built her a work table beneath the trees. He did not kiss her often. When he did, it was like a promise, not to keep her, but to always see her. One night, as cicadas sang and stars crowded the sky, he held her hand and said, "You don't have to be brave anymore." Ellie smiled. "I don't think I ever was. I think I was just waiting to be seen." He nodded. "You were never the ghost, Ellie. You were the fire." And she believed him, because the fire was still there. But now, it flew, like the sparrow, whole. Not because the break was gone, but because she had chosen what came next. And so, dear listener, if you've ever felt like Ellie, hushed, cornered, made small by those who feared your strength, may you remember this: you are not too broken to begin again. You are not too late for love that listens, and you are not alone. Now tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this tale stirred something in your heart, like and subscribe for more Wild West stories that speak of quiet courage and the freedom that comes not in noise, but in choosing your own name. Until next time, ride gentle, ride true.